Okay, so we're diving into some, well, let's be honest, kind of dry stuff today.
Yeah.
We've got this stack of historical records about Israeli settlements, but trust me on this, it's way more interesting than it sounds like, way more.
Absolutely.
We're talking about the real nitty-gritty here, actual records of land purchases, legal decisions, financial transactions, all that jazz.
Right, the stuff that doesn't usually make headlines.
Exactly, and it's all pulled from a single document. It's massive, spans decades, like from the 1970s to the 2000s. It's wild.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's what we're going to be digging into today. Not to bore you with the fine print, but more like trying to uncover those unexpected twists and turns, the stuff that makes history actually interesting.
I like it.
So get this. You've got land purchases from as far back as the 1800s, some even earlier. Can you believe that?
Talk about a blast from the past.
No kidding. And we're not talking just a name and a handshake here. This document, it's got detailed financial figures, legally binding documents, the whole 9 yards.
Wow, so it's like stepping into a time machine almost.
Totally. And you'd think, right, that these early land purchases were all driven by, ideology and stuff. But get this, the document. It shows that a surprising number were straight-up financial transactions between individuals.
It really makes you rethink the whole narrative, doesn't it?
Oh, sure.
And to really wrap our heads around it, we got to rewind a bit, go back to the time of the Ottoman Empire, and then later, the British Mandate period. Land ownership back then, it wasn't as straightforward as it is now.
Right. Things were a little more, shall we say, flexible.
Exactly. And these legal frameworks, as loose as they might seem to us now, they were everything. They were the foundation for justifying these settlements, even as the world around them was changing like crazy.
It's like the Wild West of legal precedents or something.
You could say that again.
And speaking of precedents, there's this almost funny entry about a dispute over a well, apparently back then, who had access to water. Huge point of contention.
Oh, I bet.
It really makes you think, even back then, water rights were a really big deal.
It's a perfect example of how all that dry legal language actually played out in the real world. This wasn't just about some water rights on paper. It was about control, about resources, and those very real tensions that pop up when different communities are all after the same piece of land.
And as we go through this document, it's incredible. It's like each page we turn, it's like we're flipping through a timeline, right, of all these major events that totally shaped the region.
It really is quite a journey.
You've got wars, right, like 67, 73, each one leaving this, mark on everything and just accelerating, the whole settlement situation.
And each conflict brought its own set of complexities.
Absolutely. And then on top of that, you've got this whole international spotlight that kind of swings towards the region, right? And suddenly there's all this pressure, everyone's got to figure out some kind of resolution.
And stakes just got higher and higher.
Exactly. And it's during this time you get, for example, the whole Camp David Accords thing happening in 79. Big, big moment. For those who need a little refresher, that was when Israel and Egypt managed to hammer out that peace agreement. And a key part of that whole thing was trying to address the Palestinian question.
Yeah.
Yeah, things were getting pretty intense.
Right, because you can't separate these events from the settlement activity. Each war, each peace agreement, every single declaration on the world stage, it's all there in the document, reflected in how things ebb and flow.
It really highlights just how connected everything was.
And, what's even more fascinating is that even within Israel, opinions on settlements, they were all over the place. Some people, they saw them as non-negotiable for security reasons. Others, it was a religious thing for them. And then you had those who saw it as this huge roadblock to peace. It wasn't this unified front or anything.
It was more like a kaleidoscope of different views, each with its own backstory and motivations.
Exactly.
It's pretty mind-blowing when you actually stop and think about it. I mean, we're talking meticulous records, right, of every construction project, the types of houses built, costs broken down to the last shekel, even how many trees they planted. It's all there.
It was systematic, very organized, well-funded. They had a plan, and they were sticking to it.
Right. This was serious business. But here's the thing that I find really gets to me. Behind all the legalese and those financial statements, we're talking about people, real families who put their whole lives into building these communities, And this document, as dry as it might seem sometimes, it actually lets us connect with that human side of things.
Absolutely. And it underscores how this isn't just about land or politics, really. It's about lives that are completely intertwined, hopes that have been passed down through generations. And it really forces you to confront the very real impact that displacement and conflict has on just, regular folks.
Yeah. One story that really stuck with me, it was about this family, right? They got displaced from their home back in 48. Decades later, they were offered, some compensation, but it was like nothing compared to what their home was actually worth. I mean, can you imagine? It's heartbreaking.
It really makes you think about the human cost of conflict,
Mm,
because that's something you can't just measure in dollars and cents.
exactly. But then on the complete other side of the spectrum, there's this really passionate statement from one of the community leaders, right? And he's totally defending settlements, like full stop. To him, it's about historical rights, security, that's it.
Absolutely. And we have to engage with those different points of view,
Yeah.
even when they seem like they're, coming from completely different worlds. Because to even begin to unravel this whole thing, we've got to understand the motivations, the fears, the hopes of everyone involved. It's messy, sure, it's complicated, but that's the reality of it.
And that's what makes this document so fascinating. It doesn't try to pick sides. It's not about easy answers. It's about making us confront those messy gray areas, those nuances that get lost in all the noise. And honestly, I think that's where the real learning happens. Going through all of this, it's like every other page we turn, there's another justification for these settlements, security concerns, historical claims, religious significance. That's a lot to process.
And that's what makes this document so important, really. It lays everything out, doesn't try to hide the complexity. You see the historical background, the ideologies, the arguments, all of it. But it also makes you think about those justifications. Are they valid? And what kind of impact have they actually had?
Right. It's not about just taking it at face value. It's about understanding how these arguments have shaped like the entire trajectory of this conflict and how they still kind of hang over everything, especially when you're talking about peace.
Absolutely. And as you get to the later parts of this document, that weight of history, it becomes really clear. It's like the settlements, they don't just stay the same.
Yeah.
They grow, they expand, they're constantly pushing at the boundaries of what's possible, what people are willing to accept, even the international community.
Yeah, the document doesn't shy away from that either. It's all there. The expansion, the legal battles, the world basically condemning what's happening. It's a stark reminder this is not some, thing of the past. This has real consequences, real world stuff happening right now.
It does. And it forces us to confront this really complicated legacy. We're talking about the peace process, the whole idea of a two-state solution. Remember, we talked about that. Creating two independent states,
Yeah.
one Israeli, one Palestinian. But those settlements, they make that path a lot harder, that's for sure.
So where does that leave us then? I mean, it feels like we've just uncovered this tangled mess of legal stuff, political maneuvering, and all these ingrained narratives. It's a bit overwhelming, if you ask me.
It is a lot to take in. But I think there's something to be said about, really understanding these nuances, confronting the difficult parts. That's where we might find some hope, right? This document, as dense as it is, reminds us that history isn't just dates and names. It's about people, the choices they made, what happened because of those choices, and this possibility for change that's always there.
It's like this document, it's a bridge, right? It takes us from the past to now. It helps us understand how we got to this point. And hopefully, maybe we can find a way to make things better, to find some kind of peace.
I'd like to think so.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm going to leave you with this. Keep asking those questions, keep wanting to learn more and keep thinking about this story because it's complex. It's about real people. And this deep dive, it's really just the beginning. Until next time, everyone.